In the sleepy town of Redwood Grove, the houses were nestled close, secrets even closer. When Julia's elderly neighbor, Mr. Thompson, passed away, the neighborhood mourned the solitary figure he had been. Julia, feeling a sense of duty, volunteered to clear out his quaint old house. The basement was cluttered with decades of accumulated memories. Amidst the dust-laden boxes, Julia stumbled upon a collection of old videotapes labeled simply as community gatherings. Curiosity piqued by the mundane labels on such old tapes, she borrowed a VCR from a local thrift store. Back home, the grainy footage flickered to life, illuminating her dim living room. The first tape seemed innocuous, a recording of a neighborhood party from the late 80s. People she recognized as younger versions of her neighbors smiled and danced. But as the tape ran, the scene shifted. The crowd moved into an oddly decorated basement, walls adorned with unfamiliar symbols and candles flickering ominously. With each tape, the gatherings grew darker. Chants in a language she couldn't understand filled the air. Hooded figures appeared, surrounding a stone altar in the center. The rituals grew in intensity, and in the final tape, a chilling scene unfolded. The hooded figures, faces now visible, were her neighbors, including Mr. Thompson. They stood around the altar where a figure, shrouded and bound, lay. The ritual peaked in a horrifying crescendo of screams that seemed to pierce through the decades. Shaken, Julia decided to confront her neighbors the next day. Each door was answered with awkward denials or bewildered ignorance. Frustrated and scared, she visited the local library to research the symbols and language from the tapes. The librarian, an old woman who had been around longer than anyone else, recognized the symbols immediately. "Child, you've stumbled upon old tales best left forgotten. Those are marks of the Silent Order, practitioners of ancient rites believed to protect this town from unseen evils." That night, Julia watched the last few minutes of the final tape again, pausing at each face, burning them into her memory. The figure on the altar was never unmasked, and none of the tapes showed what followed the ritual. Sleep eluded her, and a growing sense of paranoia crept in. The following morning, Julia found a plain, unmarked tape left on her doorstep. With trembling hands, she played it. The video showed the same basement, but the camera was static, focused on the altar. One by one, her neighbors walked into the frame, no longer young, each placing a hand on the stone surface and whispering something inaudible. The last to enter was the librarian. She looked straight into the camera and spoke. "Julia, you should not have watched." The screen went blank, and Julia's doorbell rang. Standing up, she walked over and opened it. No one was there. But on her doorstep lay a single black candle, still warm, as if recently extinguished. The implications were clear. She was now part of the conspiracy, enveloped in the silence that had protected Redwood Grove for generations. As the weight of her discovery settled in, she understood that some secrets bind tighter than the tapes that hold them. In the once tranquil suburb of Elmwood Heights, the yards were manicured, the streets quiet, save for the mysterious stretch of road where the old Marston house stood. It was there that Thomas and Mia, a young couple with a flair for botany, decided to settle, undeterred by the local rumors of its odd previous owner, a reclusive botanist known only as Mr. Cole. Almost immediately, Thomas took to transforming the neglected garden. But something strange occurred. The plants didn't just thrive, they exploded in growth overnight, twisting vines and blooming flowers at an unnaturally rapid pace. Neighbors whispered, glancing nervously at the burgeoning jungle that began to creep beyond its boundaries. As weeks passed, small pets in the neighborhood started to vanish. Whispered concerns turned to a silent panic that swept through Elmwood Heights. Thomas, increasingly obsessed with his flourishing garden, spent night after night under the moonlight, tending to his eerie garden. Mia, growing concerned, began to investigate. In the dusty attic, she discovered Mr. Cole's old journals. They were filled with botanical sketches and frantic notes about harnessing the essence of life to accelerate growth. The entries became increasingly unhinged, discussing sacrifices for the night gardener, a figure he believed was the true cultivator of the garden. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mia followed Thomas out into the garden, hidden from his view. She watched in horror as he stood among the dense foliage, whispering to the plants. As he left, shadowy figures seemed to move within the thicket, tending the plants with ghostly hands. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Mia confronted Thomas. He confessed that he had found an ancient ritual in Mr. Cole's notes that promised endless growth and bountiful harvests. All it required was life, any life. His desperation to revive the garden had driven him to use small animals. But the garden grew hungrier, its demands greater. Determined to stop the madness, Mia and Thomas agreed to destroy the garden. They mixed herbicide into the watering system, planning to poison the monstrous flora. That night, the plants writhed and twisted as if in pain, emitting a chilling, almost human scream. The couple watched, holding each other, believing it to be over. But as the sun rose the next morning, Mia found Thomas missing. Frantic, she searched the wilting garden, only to find his watch near the largest of the shrubs, half consumed by the plant. Heartbroken and terrified, she realized the true cost of their actions. Days turned into weeks, and the garden began to die off, revealing a horrifying sight. Entwined within the roots and vines were the remains of countless small creatures, and chillingly, a human skeleton that Mia knew belonged to Mr. Cole. Mia moved away soon after, the house left abandoned once more. The garden never regrew, but neighbors reported seeing a figure tending the barren earth at night, a sorrowful shadow caring for dead plants under the moonlight, forever a servant to the night gardener.